Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg takes your calls with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. 0845 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC 973. This is Call Clegg on London's biggest conversation. LBC 97.3.
It's 9 o'clock on Thursday, the 31st of October, and that means it's time for Call Clegg with me, Nick Clegg, here on LBC 97.3. So I'm taking your questions for the next half hour or so. Do get in touch. Call on 0845 6060 973 or email at nickclegg@lbc.co.uk. And of course, you can watch on the website lbc.co.uk. But let's go to the first caller, Kirsty in Carshalton.
Hi there.
Hello.
I'm just calling because in regards to the Back to Work scheme, basically when I applied to try and get some help with funding, I was made to feel belittled as if I was the same as someone who hadn't worked since I was 16, as someone that hasn't gone through uni. You know, say I've been working since I was 16, I've just graduated with my degree. So what I'd like to ask is, how would you reform the scheme so that people are treated as an individual case rather than being put all in the same category? And as well as this, would you try and bring in more contracts to allow for a wider choice of work experience?
Well, I'd certainly agree with the latter point, Kirsty, that we do need to expand the work experience opportunities because, you know, despite the, I think, ludicrous allegations from some people that work experience is slave labour and all the rest of it. And by the way, on that point, the court completely threw out those allegations yesterday. Work experience, as I think you're suggesting yourself, is a really important stepping stone to getting, as the name implies, some experience of work in order to then go and find permanent work elsewhere. And actually the experience of the scheme that we have introduced called the Youth Contract, where we have massively expanded the number of work experience places so that anybody between the ages of 18 and 24 who's been out of work for a certain period of time can get onto a work experience scheme, has shown that it really is a great way of getting people into the habit of working and then finding work. As for how you can treat people, I'd like to know was this at the Job Centre Plus, Kirsty, or was it through one of the work programme providers?
No,
what was it?
Through the Job Centre Plus. This is my first ever claimant, and within the first meeting of going there, they told me I had to go and do a 30-hour work placement.
Yeah.
For me, I want to become a special needs teacher.
Mm-hmm.
The experience they wanted to give me was to go and stand on a barge in Battersea holding a charity collection box.
Right, yeah.
And for me, I already volunteer as well. I'm starting to volunteer in a placement at a school that I found myself, as well as that I volunteer at an animal rescue centre. I wasn't given the option to go and do one of those. It was, you have to go stand on a barge, otherwise you don't get your job seekers.
Yeah.
You know, I've been working since I was 16. I've worked in all different industries, cleaning, bar work, shop work. I've got plenty of customer service.
Yeah.
So me standing on a barge, that's not going to give me any benefit.
No, I have to say, I can see what you say, because you're saying that you had some opportunity to do work experience which was more directly related to where you want to end up working anyway.
Where I want to go, yeah. What I got told was that I said, can I go and do 30 hours here? And they said no, because we haven't got the time or the resources to go down and get them to sign a contract, which I could have taken myself to got them to sign the contract.
Right.
I think the other point I wanted to make as well was I was told that I was dressed too smartly to go to the job centre by the people there. I was in, you know, just a normal smart casual wear, and I was told that I need to go get some baggy jeans or tracksuit bottoms for my work placement. Yeah, I think that's, you know, that's not setting up people
was
in the right frame of mind.
Was it the JCP in Carshalton?
It was. I went to the one in Sutton, and then I had to go to the work placement in Croydon.
Right.
And I think for that, to sell someone that they're dressed too smartly to go to a job is incorrect as well, because obviously you're setting young people in a frame of mind that it doesn't matter how they dress.
Let's get Mr. I mean, he might be difficult for the Deputy Prime Minister to respond in
well,
detail.
look, yeah, I mean, obviously, Kirsty, I can't respond to exactly who you spoke to in which Job Centre Plus. They have quite a lot of discretion about all of this. And by the way, I'm full of admiration. By the sounds of it, you know what you want to do.
Yes.
You've already sorted out your own work experience arrangements. You quite rightly,
it's the level
I think.
Of reform, I think.
You're quite right. Yeah, look, there is quite a lot of flexibility.
I hear what you say about the idea of it being unfair with this work experience, but the government did actually lose the Supreme Court case yesterday.
We lost on a separate point, which is about whether the requisite amount of information was provided. Well, we've already legislated in order to make sure that, according to the Department for Work and Pension, that we address the outstanding point in that judgment. But actually, I think what most members of the public will remember was was the original furore and sort of controversy, rather, around people saying that somehow doing a work experience place, as Kirsty, in this conversation we've just heard, has already said, it can be really valuable to then gaining experience to going on to do a full-time job. That somehow was an exploitative relationship. I thought that was always an absolutely ridiculous thing to say, because Kirsty's talked about the problems of finding the work experience placement right for her, but the principle of getting up in the morning, going out, working with other people who are working, all the experience shows it's a really important way of boosting someone's self-confidence to then go on and find work.
Kirsty, stay in touch. Let us know how you get on. I'm telling you, if I needed a special needs teacher, I'd employ a young woman like Kirsty.
You sound very impressive, Kirsty, so good luck. Good luck.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Shadi in Hammersmith. Hi, Shadi.
Good morning, Nick.
Hello.
And good morning, Nick, the host as well. I'm calling actually regarding Mrs. Shaw Smith. I have very strong views regarding this woman, not as a woman or as a person, but as a head of department that let down a very young kid, very young baby, unfortunately with the parents irresponsible. My views are very strong against her.
And while I want to hear your views on another occasion, we've got the Deputy PM here. What would your question be to Nick?
My questions are two parts. What's your message that you're going to send now to every parent, which unfortunately in this case is not the case, but to every parent that their kid could be abused or in danger, and to every person that takes her place, that this job is not a picnic or taking for a ride, and you can do mistakes and get rewarded for.
£600,000 it is reportedly the payoff that Sharon Shoesmith, who ran Haringey Social Services, of course responsible for the care or lack of for baby Peter. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Shelley, I have a lot of sympathy with your reaction. I should think everybody who was still horrified by what we learnt about the terrible case of baby P would also just sort of think, we shouldn't have a reward for failure. And whilst this is a matter legally, of course, between Haringey Council and Sharon Shoesmith, the fact that this settlement appears to be done in secret, so that we don't really know very much about it, I think only compounds people's bewilderment about this. And our government, the coalition government, doesn't think that you should be having these kind of secret, confidential payouts like this. It should be out in the open. This is taxpayers' money, after all.
Is she deserving of that amount of money, Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, I don't know the details of the settlement. That's the problem, because it's secret. I certainly don't think anyone is deserving of basically being rewarded in one way or another for failure. And
isn't part of it the failure by the previous administration in the way that she was effectively she was fired by Ed Balls?
Look, there's a whole lot of things which in a sense I'm not in a very good position to go into, which is exactly whether her claim for unfair dismissal was or wasn't followed in the right way. But I'm saying, just like Shadi, is a sort of someone who remembers those terrible the terrible depiction of this systemic failure that let that little boy down, to now see sometime later that in secret a payout is being made of the scale that's reported. I think that does leave people somewhat dismayed. I can't comment on the details of it because it's really not the remit of the government to do that. It's up to the Haringey Council and Sharon Shoesmith. But the fact that this is happening behind this cloak of secrecy does worry me.
Should she take the money?
Well, look, I'm just really uncomfortable about the whole thing. Seriously uncomfortable about the whole thing. I doubt what I say was going to be listened to by Sharon Shoesmith, but I just don't think we should be in a culture where apparent failure can be rewarded on this scale, or rewarded can be, if you like, made up for on payouts of this scale, and that should all happen in secret. It's got to be brought out into the open.
Shadi, we're talking about this again, I'm sure, in the coming days. Stay tuned. Mr. Clegg.
Nick in Twickenham.
This will be good.
Three Nicks. Oh dear, it sounds like some pantomime.
Good morning, Mr. Clegg. It's an honour to speak to you.
It's good to speak to you.
My main question was, with the ever-increasing population, especially the babies and the elderly population, how can the government even think of or justify closing down various A&Es and various hospitals, especially in London, where the population is about to burst and explode?
I think you're talking about the news this morning about the recommendations for the reconfiguration, what they call reconfiguration, in the Northwest Trust, yeah?
Yeah, Hammersmith and Charing Cross.
And Ealing Hospital.
Well, Ealing are going to be okay, but there is a sort of question. I hear what you say, but at the moment Ealing is still, but they may have some services removed. Mr. Clegg.
Look, Nick, as you know, these are recommendations made by people who are looking at all the clinical needs of the population across London, and it's not a political decision in that sense. It's a decision taken by people who are paid to look at what are the best ways to make sure the best care is available to the maximum number of people. And I think, if I understand it correctly, to be honest, I haven't followed every twist and turn of the recommendations for the Northwest Trust, but my understanding is that some A&E departments, it's recommended, will be downgraded, but other, I think about 5 hospitals in the Northwest area will actually be upgraded, will be providing, for instance, 24-hour consultant-led care. I think the problem we have in London and elsewhere is, can every hospital in every part of the country, in every part of the city, provide the identical amount of intensive 24-hour care or not? Or, as the experts recommend, is it actually better for us as patients to make sure that you have first-class, first-rate care in certain places, so that you have the specialists there available in those locations, rather than, in a sense, spreading things too thinly? That's what I think lies behind all of this. It's incredibly controversial. I understand that anybody who sees any downgrading of their own local hospital, A&E and so on, will be concerned. I think it's really important now that the authors of these recommendations are able to explain clearly and simply the reasons why they've taken these decisions and why they clearly believe that it's better for us as patients.
Quick response from you, Nick.
The only problem is that all the A&Es that you're talking about upgrading are already so busy that they will not be able to cope with if these A&E closes, if the population, let's say for Ealing, around 68,000 people, go to various other A&Es, they are not going to be able to cope.
And on that point, in fact, it's been revealed, Mr. Clegg, that five A&Es will serve 2 million people in North London. Now, that's a rather concerning statistic, Deputy Prime Minister.
Yes, and of course this is part and parcel of a bigger issue, which is we've seen a very sharp increase in the number of people going to A&E for some time now. Various complex reasons for that. Some people say it goes back to the botched renegotiation of GP contracts, which encourage people to go to hospital rather than go to the GP. We've got this whole issue about people sometimes going to A&E for ailments that weren't traditionally something you'd go to A&E for. Population pressures, demographic changes, as Nick has said, and so on and so forth. But I think we've got to allow people who are trying to look towards the long-term needs of patients in London to also make recommendations which they think would provide the best A&E services in the long run. Nobody in government, nobody in the NHS, none of the managers, none of the people working in any A&E department want anything other than the best possible A&E service for the maximum number of people.
On the subject of population, thanks, Nick. Stay in touch about those hospitals. We're going to be watching that campaign and obviously charting its success or lack of it. On the subject of people and the population, Deputy Prime Minister, the Daily Express today says that Britain is full up and fed up and is urging a crusade to stop the new flood of Romanian and Bulgarian migrants who are just 2 months away. We've taken calls already on this. This is what Andy in Uxbridge had this question directly for you.
Nick, I'd like to know what the government is actually going to do about immigration. Could we have a straight answer as to why things haven't been, the loophole hasn't been closed down, why the numbers have not been reduced, what is actually going on, what are Brussels not allowing you to do? Could you answer the question straight, please?
Yep, sure, I will, Andy. It's just simply not correct to say there's been no change. In fact, net immigration's been reduced, roughly speaking, by about a third. We've made some very, very significant changes, as you know, bearing down on immigration from non-EU countries, changing the visa system. I'm, as you know, adamant, or I hope you know, adamant that we should also have the full restoration of exit checks, which were removed by previous governments, so that we know not only who comes into this country, but who should leave at the end of their visa. We inherited an immigration system which was very, very poorly administered. We've still got some way to make sure that we straighten it all out administratively, but we've made some very significant changes. We're just tabling some legislation right now, which would, for instance, make sure that the appeals process on immigration, yes, people should be able to appeal. That's natural justice. But the appeals shouldn't be able to go on and on and on and on forever. What I want to see is an immigration system that means that we are open to people who come to this country, who want to help out, who want to work, who want to pay their taxes, want to play by their rules. Our public services depend on people coming to this country. The NHS would collapse overnight if we simply pulled up the drawbridge, and we should continue to give British citizens the freedom to go, as they do actually in very large numbers, to live elsewhere. So you can't suddenly sort of just put up a barrier, but it's got to be done in a way which is administratively competent and that people have confidence in a way that you, Andy, clearly don't.
But if we focus on the events possibly of the start of the new year, Deputy Prime Minister, and an estimate that could be between 50 and 70,000 Romanians, Bulgarians and other Roma could come to this country, is Britain full up and fed up?
Well, clearly Andy's fed up. I don't believe, as I say, that in this modern world it is good for us. It's certainly not good for jobs in this country to simply say that, put up a sign and say nobody's welcome.
But we haven't got 70,000 jobs.
Well, hang on. We don't know how many people will come yet from Romania and Bulgaria.
You must have a figure.
We've been through this before.
I know we have. We're getting ever closer.
And previous governments made a major mistake by putting out what turned out to be
13,000 is what the Labour Party said. In total, it was 600,000. Exactly. That's why people are concerned.
Exactly. No, I was going to say, I certainly don't want to deny people's concern. No. Absolutely, it's palpable. A lot of people raise it with me, and I totally understand, having been given these completely misleading, as it turned out to be, misleading estimates, which underestimated the number of people who came here from Central and Eastern Europe.
There must be a figure you worked to in the corridors of power.
Well, all I'm saying is that we shouldn't automatically assume that it's going to be exactly the same scale, not least because, of course, there are a number of Bulgarian and Romanian communities, large communities, in other parts of the European Union, and that often suggests that is where people will tend to go. But look, of course we're going to keep a very close eye on this, and of course we're doing all the things that I mentioned to Andy to make sure that public confidence is restored in the way in which we count people in and count people out into this country.
More calls. I think we've got one.
Mark in Tilbury. Mark.
Morning to both of you. Nick, in respects of all the utilities that have all been sold off, where is all the regular sort of maintenance going? You're not keeping an eye on, if we go to the rail come to a standstill on Monday, is it? And why is the checks, when it was in-house, you'd have gangs of people going along the tracks.
This is what Bob Crow said, isn't it, Mark? I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so don't go. I'm just fading. Bob Crow said during the storms it was wholly unacceptable that trains were delayed in some instances for 24 hours. 2,000 people have been let go over the last 20 plus years who would have been out there on gangs. They would have been soaring down the trees. They would have been clearing the lines. It's because of this that so many trains were disrupted for so long. Is Bob Crow the union leader's claim?
To be honest, Mark, I simply don't know whether Bob Crow's claim in this instance
is right. Power companies, the train companies would say there were power lines actually coming down. Yeah. It wouldn't matter if you had 50,000 extra men or women. You can't send them out in dangerous situations with power cables.
I think that's right. And then also, I think South West trains, for instance, they had a lot of trees across their lines, and they were pretty well running up to normal timetable. The following morning. Mark, I think there's so much has changed over the last 20 years in terms of the technology used to keep our lines open and to clear the lines, that I'm not sure if simply saying the number of people who no longer work on the lines is the best measure of whether we can do it properly or not. But the public rightly expect that, yes, even after this very windy storm on Monday morning, that very rapid efforts are made to keep the trains running.
And I would just say, Mark, as I said to Mr. Crow, these events happen every 25 years. The fact you keep 2,000 people on the books for something that happens every quarter of a century, I don't know about the economic wisdom. Questions?
I took a train the following morning up to Sheffield. That was all right. But I mean, I'm sure other bits of the network were affected in different ways.
They did struggle, but they're back on track literally now, Deputy Prime Minister.
Stephen in West Wickham.
Yeah. My question is about the recent press regulation, Ferrari. we have a legal framework, and it seems to me part of the problem was that it wasn't applied, or it was applied in a very limp-wristed way. We've now got the press saying, well, we don't like what the Royal Charter is, and so we're not playing. What are you going to, how do you propose to apply the existing laws and the new framework to the press?
Well,
particularly if they say no, and it's already been floated, as you'll be aware, Mr. Clegg, we're simply going to take our ball and not play.
Yeah, well, no, look, it's always up to the press. It was always the whole point about Leveson, which I frankly think has been completely forgotten, was that he was quite overt about the fact that he didn't want, I certainly don't want, I don't think anybody wants direct regulation by the press. No one wants politicians to interfere with the cherished freedoms of our wonderfully raucous and vibrant press. And it's entirely voluntary. If the press don't want to enter into this new system, they don't have to. And some significant parts of it have said they've got no intention of doing so. That was
what's
always
it all been for?
Well, what we were asked to do by Lord Justice Leveson was to say, look, avoid a heavy-handed political reaction to the scandals of Millie Dowler and all the rest of all abuses that outrage the public. In other words, continue to allow the press to decide voluntarily their own self-regulatory arrangements. But we've got to have something there in place to ensure that these self-regulatory arrangements don't become as incredible as the old Press Complaints Commission, which just was considered to be utterly toothless and not independent of the newspapers that sometimes had to be held to account. So what he suggested was that a separate body should be set up that every 3 years applies a kind of MOT to whatever arrangements the press have set up for themselves to check that they're properly independent and they're working in a way that can give the public the reassurance that when things go wrong, there is proper recourse and redress. Then bluntly, you had a very, very frankly, angels dancing on the head of a pin argument about one version of a royal charter versus another.
Well, one has political involvement, and one doesn't.
No, it's just simply not. It's simply a misunderstanding of it. I think what you're referring to is the role of a vote in Parliament of 2/3 of the members of Parliament if you wanted to change that charter. The whole point about the provisions in the cross-party charter, which has now been adopted in the Privy Council, is in order to stop politicians tampering with it in the future.
If you want to listen to me, listen to Roger Alton, who formerly edited The Observer and The Independent. He's now executive editor of The Times, so he's not given to hyperbole. It's the end of 300 years of press freedom if you've got politicians deciding to judge how stiff the standards of regulation are, and that's what will happen. It could potentially be the difference between a free country and a non-free country. That's Roger Alton speaking, Mr. Clegg.
It's wildly hyperbolic. It is not for politicians to decide. It is for the self-regulatory arrangements of the press to be established, and then for a separate verifying body established by a royal charter, again not created by politicians in any way at all, to then if you like, apply a test every 3 years as set out by Lord Justice Leveson to make sure that for a victim of abuse in the future, they feel that the system of recourse and redress, which under the past was considered to be completely toothless by the Press Complaints Commission, it does work properly. The politicians have no role in doing that at all. And in fact, what we sought to do is to make sure that politicians can't simply capriciously change that arrangement, because that would indeed be dangerous.
Brought in by the Privy Council, which you chaired yesterday, written in language such as "to all to whom these presents shall come greeting." This is fairly medieval, isn't it?
Yeah, but look, the reason why we ended up on the Royal Charter, and I should point out it's the press themselves who wanted a Royal Charter as well, so there were two competing Royal Charters, which if we'd adopted the one proposed by Pressboff, but that was found to be wanting through a perfectly fair and open examination of its strengths and weaknesses, that would have been through the Privy Council as well. The reason we did that was precisely to avoid the concerns of politicians legislating directly for the press. So we've avoided, if you like, governments passing law on the press. All we needed to do, it's a bit like if you're setting up a new body, because Lord Justice Leveson said you need a new body to, as I say, every 3 years, give people a reassurance that the self-regulatory arrangements established voluntarily by the press work properly for the public, particularly for victims where things have gone wrong. Setting up a body like that, you can't do it in a vacuum. The BBC, for instance, is set up by Royal Charter. You need something to make sure that it has a formal status. That's all we were talking about. So I really do think claims that this is somehow direct interference in the long traditions of the freedom of the press are not accurate.
Why isn't coverage allowed of those meetings, the Privy Council?
the Privy Council.
You chaired it, didn't you?
I'm presently, would you believe it, the president of the Privy Council.
Who attended?
Jeremy Hunt, Lord McNally, Maria Miller, and myself.
And obviously Her Majesty.
And Her Majesty, of course.
But no minutes are published.
Well, look, the Privy Council runs as the Privy Council always has done.
But as you didn't like the secret and confidential, to play your words back to your dealings regarding Sharon Shoesmith. Yeah. But when it comes to secret and confidential dealings concerning press freedom and the monarch, it's fine. You'll chair the meeting.
The Royal Charter is not negotiated at the Privy Council.
Something 300 years of press freedom.
No, I don't think.
Secret and confidential, not for Sharon Shoesmith. It's okay for press freedom.
But why would a Privy Council decision which endorses a press charter somehow be okay, and a Privy Council which endorses a cross-party charter adopted by the vast majority of MPs not be okay?
Much as you have frustration, you don't know the inner dealings of the Sharon Shoesmith deal. Wouldn't it be healthy to let the press see the minutes of whatever took place yesterday?
Shall I tell you what happened yesterday?
I'd love to hear.
Because it is so straightforward. It's simply a decision to adopt the charter. There is no discussion of its content. There is no discussion of a single word of the actual Royal Charter. It is simply to provide the imprimatur, if you like, of the Privy Council, the Royal Charter, which has been debated, dissected, discussed, argued over for months and months and months in public, is simply adopted. It is an adoption. It is not a negotiation. That's all.
So to those who say that is the end of 300 years of press freedom...
I don't agree with that.
Like that?
I think when we sit here in a year's time, I will challenge you to claim that 300 years of press freedom has been snuffed out. I doubt it very much.
You heard it here first. Call Clegg is going on for another 12 months. That's what I take out of this.
12 months, mate. 12 years.
Other questions? I think hopefully you've got the note.
Well, I don't have the next one.
Is it Ahmed in New Malden?
No,
I'm so sorry. I've not made it. That's my fault.
Good morning.
Hi, Ahmed. How are you?
You are through.
I'm very well. I hope I'm allowed to give a bit longish question.
Go ahead, sir.
It's concerning these outrageous and extortionate energy price hikes every year, which are simply unjustifiable and I believe should be considered unlawful.
Mm-hmm.
We the consumer are being ripped off non-stop. We have no choice but to pay up or freeze and light up candles. 6 energy companies are a cartel, all but in name. They are not going to change their current arbitrary ways to increase the energy prices every year. And, I feel there's no point switching the energy companies for 10, 20, 30 pounds. Even if you switch, the energy company will more than make up the differential within 6, 12 months under the next extortionist annual price rising.
And just to move you to a question, Ahmed, it's brilliant background, but I have, because I have so many others. Could I move you to a question for Mr. Clegg? Thank you, sir.
Yes, I just want to say that, what action, Mr. Clegg, you intend to take, your government intend to take, and I think this can only be done with all-party support to curtail these outrageous annual energy prices.
Stay on the line, Ahmed.
Yep. I think there are lots of things we can do, Ahmed. Firstly, we can make sure you say that switching doesn't make a difference. It can actually save you hundreds of pounds. And I agree with you, we need more people more other providers offering you better tariffs than the big 6. And that's why under this government, we've now got 15 alternative providers offering you really, really good deals. And actually, we're announcing today, Ed Davies doing it, we're going to make sure that can be done in 24 hours.
How do we do that?
Well,
when did you last switch, Mr. Clegg?
I haven't switched for a while, for a long while, and I'm a customer to. Well, because I was actually content that the tariff I was on for a while was the best I could find. But I'm certainly, once I know whether all the big 6 are going to change their prices.
Are you with one of the big 6?
I'm with one of the big 6.
Yeah. How much is your quarterly bill?
I'm not going to start going into my own personal bills. Can I just finish my answer to Ahmed rather than you? Firstly, Ahmed, we can allow you to switch much more quickly, and that's what we're going to do. That can save you hundreds of pounds. Secondly, we've got to give people help who are on low incomes with their fuel bills. So we're writing out a cheque for £135 this winter to 2 million of the poorest households. As you know, we're doing some work in government now. We'll make an announcement in the next few weeks about whether we can bring the bills down further. And do you know what I would say to the big 6? They've got to open up their books. They've got to level with people like you. They've got to be straight with their customers. Because frankly, the more I look into this, the more confusing I find it. Yesterday, I heard someone from the big 6 on the radio say, "Oh, it's all because of these so-called levies." So I asked my office. I said, "Well, what was the proportion of the overall bill that was sort of consumed by these levies last year?" compared to this year. And it's exactly the same. It was 9% last year, it was 9% this year. If that's the same, how can if those levies have remained the same proportion, at least over the last 24 months or so, how on earth can that justify a double-digit increase now? So I just think if they're going to keep their customers with them, like Ahmed, like anybody,
yes,
they've got to be a whole lot more straightforward with people about how to explain why they have introduced these big price increases this winter.
But how will your Lib Dem colleague get it down? It's 35 days currently.
Yep.
And it took me longer because I had to go to the Ombudsman.
When did you switch?
2 years ago. I spend about £128 a month. It goes on direct debit. Is that roughly yours?
Nick, I'm simply...
You see how I did that?
Oh, so clever. I tell you, you're so subtle. I didn't see that coming. I didn't see it coming.
How much is your energy bill?
I'm not going to tell you how much my energy bill is.
I must be courteous. How much is your energy bill?
I'm not going to tell you.
All right. Anyway, 35 days down to 1. How is Ed Davey going to do that?
Well, he's going to explain in Parliament later, and I think it's going to make a dramatic difference, because quite a lot of people I meet who say, yeah, I'd like to switch, and I think Ahmed slightly sort of suggested this as well, it's not worth it, and it's such a hassle, I have to fill in all these forms, it'll take ages. If we can show people, as we are absolutely determined to do, that it's really, really easy, then, by the way, people can do what Ed Miliband, it now turns out, did. He switched to a different provider who turns out to think that his price freeze is what I said it was here last week. Big fat 24-carat con. Prices would go up, jobs would go down, and investment would go down.
If you weren't, and I fully respect the fact you won't tell me how much you spend, are you at least trying to keep the thermostat down a little? Are you taking any measures to keep your energy bills down?
Of course I am, like everybody else. Of course I am. But
are the children wearing jumpers?
Right now, they're at my parents right now. It's half-term week, so I very much hope they are if my mum is listening.
Okay. One question from me, one final email. You're in the papers today. You've ruled out forming a government with Labour unless they pledge to support HS2. You obviously, of course, are a Sheffield MP, so it's desperately important to you for your constituents. Would you go that far?
No, look, I wasn't getting into what would or wouldn't be the content of coalition agreements between the Liberal Democrats and other parties. I was expressing my anger at what I think is Labour's...
Have they betrayed the North?
I think they've really betrayed the North. I think they betrayed every single business and family that I represent and care about in Sheffield, who would benefit massively to the tune of hundreds of millions of pounds and more jobs in the future by having a proper rail linking Sheffield and indeed other parts of the north with the financial powerhouse of London. It's really important for investment in the parts of the north, and I cannot believe that a party that constantly piously goes round that it is the party, the Labour Party that is, of the north, now wants to, for purely cynical short-term reasons, not only turn its back on the north, but turn its back on an idea which it, the Labour Party that is, first launched.
OK, but it doesn't make it a deal-breaker.
No, I'm not getting into red lines about coalition, but I certainly feel very strongly about it.
And we end with this. Graham in Bushy. Tonight is Halloween. Nick Clegg. Who would you least like to appear at your front door, trick-or-treating? David Cameron, Ed Miliband, or Alan Sugar? And this is genuinely him. I haven't written it. I can't give it to you for a reason.
I think Alan Sugar and I should call a truce for a week.
OK, so now we move to Mr Cameron or Miliband.
I don't want any of them, frankly, on my doorstep this evening, if that's all right.
No trick-or-treating, but the bombshell news is we say farewell to Nick Clegg today, but we've got 12 more years of Call Clegg. You're listening to LBC. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. LBC 97.3 News is next. It's 9:32.
Thank you. Good morning. Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg has told